Welcome to But Jesus Drank Wine.
And other stories that kept us stuck. I'm Mead.
And I'm Christy.
And in this podcast, we'll explore the stories that kept us, well, stuck, wanting to drink and not wanting to drink all at the same time.
Join us as we show you that freedom from alcohol does not have to mean a life sentence of misery and missing out,
but actually means living an authentic life full of peace, joy, and purpose.
Hello, my beautiful friend. It's Christy here. We are so blessed to have Rina Bowring with us today. Rina and I met during one of our coaching certifications, and she just has a beautiful heart and a really beautiful, relatable story that she tells so vulnerably on this episode. So I'm excited for you to listen to it. But before you do, I wanted to let you know that Rina is based down in Australia, and she is going to be taking a call time for us, a connection call, in the But Jesus Drank Wine community. So if you're in that part of the world, we have a few members in that part of the world now, and you're looking for connection, you can connect with Rina within our community, and you can get all of the details at the link in the show notes, and we would love to see you there. Okay, enjoy the episode. Hi, everyone. Happy Monday. Hi. We are so excited to welcome Rina Bowring, who, were we in the same class when we were being certified? Or
Yeah,
we
you
were.
and I were, Christy. Yes, Mead,
Yeah.
you were before. Yes.
Yeah, Mead was before us, but I think we were together. She is a certified coach helping women of faith make alcohol small and irrelevant in their lives. We love it. She was born and raised in South Africa, but now lives in Sydney, Australia with her husband and two beautiful kiddos. And we are so excited to talk to you about your story and what you've been up to and just catch up. It's so fun.
Oh, amazing. I'm just so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So should we just take it back? Take it back to where it all started?
Oh, gosh. I always cringe when I think about it because it started so young. My son's 10 now, and I started drinking when I was 13. And I just look at him and I'm just horrified,
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
to put it in perspective. But yeah, I just started 13, sneaking drinks from my parents, a little bar fridge. And to me, it was lighting a fire. It was immediately would always drink to the point of being obliterated or, vomiting or blacking out. And it was just this immediate binge drinking pattern. Whenever we could be out on weekends, we would be trying to get a hold of alcohol and we would be drinking. And it's interesting because I grew up in a really Christian family, full of faith, Sunday church, would go to all the Christian camps and everything. But it was quite strict, our household. And so there was a lot of rules and a lot of expectations. And for me, I think looking back, alcohol is just this sense of freedom. It felt like, okay, for those moments, I was just going to be free and I was going to do exactly what I wanted, how I wanted. And, so that was one layer for me. And I think the other layer for me was just the sense of fitting in. Immediately it connected me to this group who were just accepting me because I was doing the things with them.
Yeah.
And, it let my guard down because I was so kind of shy and quiet. And people pointed it out a lot, who's your quiet friend? And so when I started drinking, I just wasn't the quiet friend anymore. I was part of the party. And so that just kicked off for me, what was 15, 17 years of being the party girl. And that phase of my life, and I identified with that so much. I was the one who was bringing the wine and bringing the party and the fun one, right?
We have no idea what you're talking about. Yep. Yeah. I get it.
Oh, but I was very fortunate to meet my husband, who's the just, calm, peaceful, stablest person that I know, thank God. And he kind of really brought in this. So when I was 27, we met when I was 25, but when I was 27, I had this, I was really just missing something in my life, missing my faith, missing that stability. And so I walked into a church and I recommitted my life to Christ. I was still drinking and everything, but my husband had, met him when I was 25, and he was kind of this beautiful, calming presence in my life and had calmed everything down like quite a lot.
Hmm.
And then so I started going to church again, had all these, church friends. I'd moved to Australia, so this was like the first kind of real genuine friendships that I'd made again. I'd felt so disconnected before that. And I started to have this little niggling voice in the back of my head about like the drinking. And, like my church friends were drinking as well. We would go out and share bottles of wine and everything. It's just so accepted.
So common.
Yeah, like there was nothing wrong with it. But that's where it started. I think me really starting to think about it, not doing anything about it for sure. Just thinking about it now and then. I would do fasts and things like 30-day, like 21-day Daniel fast and like Easter, Lent, everything. I would never be able to complete them because the alcohol was always the thing that would get in the way. And so that was, one of the first signals for me. Kind of continue just drinking mostly, over weekends, still binging or when used to go out. But it wasn't really until I had my son that my relationship with alcohol just took a whole different turn. And I had him. He was this beautiful little boy. And I was just so naive, I think. I just knew nothing about what to expect with motherhood or how things can turn, right? And from the first day, he just did not sleep. The first night in hospital, he was cried the whole night. And he's just this beautiful little sensitive soul. Obviously, knowing him now that he's 10, he still is like so aware of everything. And so his mind is just incredible. And so, like, now, I'm like, of course he doesn't sleep. But even as a baby, like, anything would like make him cry. He cried all day, he didn't sleep all night. And I was just plunged into this. And, the postpartum depression hit, but I didn't know it at the time. Like, I had no words for it, or, like, I was just so disconnected from how I felt and what was happening with me. I was so focused on the situation that I didn't even, if somebody had asked me, I wouldn't even have known. I mean, it wasn't even until it went on for ages, the depression. It wasn't until like really with the coach training that somebody, one of the coaches, was talking about postpartum, her experience with postpartum depression, in one of the calls. And it hit me like a light went on. I was like, oh my God, that has what's been happening. Like, it was so interesting that I couldn't, you get the brochures and everything and you read about like symptoms and in the mothers groups, but it just didn't actually click for me, which was so interesting looking back. But how that started to look for me was like I would wake up in the morning and there would just be this like dread
Mm.
of the day to come, like absolutely just thinking about it and just dreading it, but knowing I had to do it. And I was like, I didn't want my husband to leave to go to work. I didn't tell him, of course, because then there was this other side of me that was like, pull it together. Everybody else can do this.
Yeah.
Everybody else is coping just fine. So there must be something wrong with you. Just pull it together and be brave and smile as he leaves out the door. But in myself, oh, there was just this, please don't go. Don't leave me alone here. Right. And I just remember like the house being a complete mess, like everything just being complete disarray, and thinking, oh, I can't even call somebody to come over because I was just so embarrassed about the state of like the house and everything in it. And just thinking, well, I can't clean it up because I can't even imagine just having the space to do that. So I was like, okay, well, I can't quite, call anybody to come over. My family lived overseas. Most of my friends didn't have kids yet. So I was just in this space of complete like disconnection. And I remember like my son wouldn't sleep in the cot at all. So I'd be like walking outside. The only place he would sleep was in the pram. And so I'd be like walking outside. It had to be a quiet road. It couldn't be a busy road. And there had to be bumps. So I couldn't just be sitting once he like fell asleep. I had to keep moving or he would wake up. And the slightest noise, like a too loud car or something, would also wake him up. So I just remember my coping mechanism in the day was every day I'd go out and buy ice cream and I would walk the streets with my ice cream, the tears like just flowing down, just pure exhaustion. Ugh, feel so sorry for myself thinking back to that. And then of course at night, it was like started to like pour that glass of wine and was so looking forward to it. That was the stage when I was like, oh, you know, like I need this. And it's amazing, like when I gave wine that purpose, that's how quickly it took a hold of me. It was like so quickly that like it would be 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at morning. And I would be thinking, oh, like what wine am I going to get tonight? Like, I would be planning my walk near the bottle store and I'd be like looking forward to this. And it almost became like a little carrot at the end of the day. I was like, it's okay. Just have to make it till 5 o'clock. I like that was actually the sentence in my head. Just have to make it till 5 o'clock. And it was like, okay, I can survive till 5 o'clock. And it was literally this like survival state. And I have to say, I almost think it got me through for a couple of months. And it was that relief and it was that thing that I could look forward to. And it's self medication. It literally did medicate all of that angst and all of that overwhelm and just crazy frustration I was feeling. Right. And this was another element of it was that I started to feel like extremely angry. I was extremely angry at the situation. I was extremely angry at, my husband for not like just knowing magically, or, how to like help me or that I even needed help. Right. I was angry at my friends for not just knowing what I needed. I was angry at all the crying, like just wanted to like literally get away. I just wanted to escape. There was this perpetual rage like building inside of me. And I, you know, that I think even more so than the alcohol was this immense avenue of shame because what happened was like I would just be snapping at my husband all the time. I would be like snapping at the crying. I would be like, my husband just started to walk on eggshells around me, right? There was this like, and I just felt so not like myself. It was this constant feeling so awful about that and feeling like this awful wife, like this awful parent. But that ultimately became my motivation to like really look at my drinking seriously because I started to realize like, okay, this is helping at night. Then in the morning, well, my already non-existent sleep was completely, oh gosh, just horrific. I was doing the 3 a.m. wake up, which of course I didn't know until I read that sentence in Annie's book was related to alcohol. But every morning, 3 a.m., I would be awake. I then had this pounding headache and this hangover to get over, along with this like dread in my stomach to get through the day. And so I realized that I was waking up just in such an awful state that now I was like having to like get over that as well as deal with all of the rest of the things. And so my main motivation was like, okay, this anger and frustration thing, like it's starting to erode everything, but I'm never going to get a hold of my moods unless alcohol goes because
Yeah.
it is making me just so cranky in the mornings and then everything just plummets from there. And so that became my motivation. And of course, like below that motivation, or I should say above that motivation, was just like my beautiful boy. I was just like, I don't want to be showing up like this for him. Like, he deserves better. I want to be the gentle, kind, patient, like mom that he deserves. And so that was really powerful. That motivation has like kept me through so much, just having that really firm, like why I was wanted to change. And then, of course, like the moment like I decided like I wanted to change, it wasn't I wanted to stop drinking. It was like, oh, I want to moderate.
Yeah.
And so I played that game for a couple of years with like just such hard learnings, right? It's like, uh, when I started to want to moderate, like that's when the cognitive dissonance, that fighting in my head just ramped up to a whole next level. And just that morning, like, okay, not going to be drinking today. Like, this is serious. Like, or, like, just going to have one, just going to have a little glass of wine, or, just that cycle just continued for about, you know, 2 years, I'd say. In between, I'd fallen pregnant with my second child, my beautiful girl. And I didn't remain AF through the pregnancy. Like there was probably 3 or 4 times that I drank in my pregnancy. And that was, so I was toying around with moderation. And then when that happened, that was like the next big red flag that went up for me. I was like, this is just like taking away, I think I realized my choice, because this is not something that I want to be doing. Like I hate doing this. And yet here I am. And so that started to really open up that doorway for recognizing that I actually was addicted to alcohol and actually becoming honest with myself about that. Because previously I was just, thinking that, oh, I'm just drinking a little bit too much, I'm just overindulging. I just don't have an off switch. But that experience like opened my eyes to like, you know what, there's something bigger going on here. Like this is actually a problem. But it was awesome because that really started to open my awareness in a whole new way of like, I didn't really want to moderate. I wanted to stop. But even so, it took me a whole nother year of, back and forth, up and down, like having data points, which I didn't even know was a data point for me. It was just like failure, right? And hating every minute of it. I was during that year, it was like I was not enjoying drinking anymore at all. It was just like this ball and chain that I was dragging around. But something wonderful happened because when I recognized like, oh, I didn't want to be drinking anymore and I really wanted to stop, the timing of me then finding Annie's book was I was so ready. I was like done with alcohol. And so when I read the book, it was like just light bulbs going on for me. Like it was like, oh, yeah, it's not helping me with this stress. Oh, yeah, it's not actually helping me with this anxiety. Like it's not calming me down, like everything just made complete sense to me in my head. It was almost like I understood it from my experience, but I needed to be able to articulate it to my brain in a way that it could consciously actually get it. And that with me was like a spontaneous sobriety moment. Like I stopped drinking from page one when she said 3 a.m. When I was like, that 3 a.m. wake up was alcohol. I was like, I was so done because I was so tired. So that was amazing. And what happened when I was able to let go of alcohol in that way is kind of a dual fold experience, because on one hand, it was incredible. I was like free. My mind was free. I started to sleep. My gosh, I could sleep and sleep and sleep for about 6 months. I just went to bed at like 8 o'clock, slept for like an hour in the afternoons and when I could. And I had this like newfound energy as well, and peace and gratitude. I remember in the morning, like, there was this opening where every morning I would just have the sense of relief flood me that, oh my gosh, I was waking up like alcohol free. And I was just like, thank you, Lord, thank you. And that really just naturally planted the seed of like starting my day with gratitude. And it has always like been this foundational thing for me to remain alcohol free. I would just think about like that morning moment, and like drinking was not even an option, right? Which was really amazing. But that initial why that I stopped drinking for, like, my moods were still like plummeting. So had more glimpses of like being happier and more grateful and all of those things. But my anger was just still, now it was even more so because I felt like I felt everything, right?
Yeah.
And it was like everything to me had become this cue to like, that was my base emotion. Like something goes wrong, angry. Like wake up in the middle. I became so aware of it. Wake up in the middle of night, angry. And I would just, there'd always be something to blame, right, for this feeling of
I
anger.
can't even imagine you angry, by the way, like, when
I,
you're not the happiest, most likely you have the most beautiful smile, and you're always smiling, and I just can't even imagine you angry.
oh, well, this is the thing, right? People say that all the time, but it's like when somebody says, the most depressed person in the room is always the funniest, right? And it becomes such a thing that you're so aware of. That anger, it wasn't the real me. It was just, and it was only like a couple of years ago as well that I learned of postpartum rage. And when I read that and I learned about that, I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
right? Because it's depression, but it manifests as this continuous rage
Oh, babe.
and resentment. And that was still there. And I think that because I had just been on autopilot with it for so many years, that it had just become my natural reaction to things. And then similarly, just so similar with the alcohol, it was like the guilt and the shame, and then the like, okay, I'm going to be different, praying about it. But every day, just the same patterns coming over and over and over. And that didn't actually shift for me until I started doing the coach training. You know, with that, like so much like started to open up for me, but it was like a really long time, probably, the 3 or 4 years after, 2 or 3 years after stopping drinking, that was the process for me of really starting to unwind, like what was happening here. Looking back, I'm like, wow, the thing that really helped me with that was really like almost like with the alcohol. It was like an emotional addiction, I would say, because it was the thing that would, I was able to start to look at like what was it really doing for me, because we do everything we do because it helps us with something, right? And so when I was able to think like, okay, it's doing something for me, because otherwise, like I keep going back to it. And I realized like what I learned, was that, gosh, anger it's really energizing. It really is. And so when I was depressed, it was actually helping me in a way to be the thing that fueled me to get out of bed, to get stuff done, even though I was like angry getting stuff done. I was getting stuff done. I was at least getting out of bed. And so I was like, huh, okay, that's interesting, because I needed that then in a way. Like there was probably other tools, definitely other tools, but I should know about them. But that's just how I coped in that moment. And I started to realize like, huh, okay, I needed that then, just like the alcohol, like it needed it then, didn't know any other tools, but I don't actually need this now anymore. Like,
Mm.
like I've got other tools. And I started to realize, like, anger was like it preventing me, because it's a secondary emotion. And so it was preventing me from, or helping me not to feel the anxiety that was underneath, the fear, the sadness. And it was so just this cover up for all those other emotions. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I just needed to kind of learn how to sit with it just a little bit to see what was actually happening underneath. And so I started to learn more about that kind of bodily connection with our emotions. And instead of just feeling it and immediately reacting to it, because it's also like this pressure valve release anger. It's like immediately, if there's any tension in your body, just releases it, right? Similarly, I looked at the costs, and the costs are horrendous of anger. Like, it's devastating. It like almost ruined my marriage. Like we're still kind of like rebuilding from that phase of our lives. Like, my kids are scared of me, right? Like they knew me as you see me, but then there was this other side that they were always kind of like knew that they didn't want to do anything wrong because they didn't want to like release that. And it was inconsistent. So sometimes it would, and then sometimes it wouldn't. And so that's like constantly just on edge. And so the cost was absolutely devastating, you know. But I started to learn, like, okay, there's just like this actual feeling of anger. When I started to pay attention to what that was, it started to create just this little bit of space, like tiny bit of space where I could sometimes choose it, like through, intentionality and becoming more aware of it over time, you know, I started to be able to choose more and more, like, okay, there it is. But what do I want to do right now? And that was like amazing, because it wasn't just this like hair trigger response anymore, but it was like the triggers were like 100 a day. So it was like constantly being aware of it and pulling myself back. But something amazing over time started to happen. It's just like that space began to grow. And then I started to realize over time, like, okay, I didn't even need that pause there. And I just kind of like reacted differently. And so that was, yeah, incredibly helpful. And I also like, you know, found the practice of centering prayer in that time as well. And that's kind of also helped to create this space where I was just learning what it felt like to be completely centered and completely just in a safe space in my body that was felt really good, and could return there, could actually choose to go there. So yeah, it was incredible. And so I think that that journey was so much more about, just learning how to be able to choose, or being given back the power to choose, and and know that I had that choice. I had a very powerful coaching call actually as well during the training, that the coach said to me, like, do you realize that it's your anger? And it's such a weird question. I was like, I had to really think about it. And I was like, yeah, yeah, it's my anger. And it was weird because it was such a shift, because it went from being like all these things, when you're like angry all the time, it feels like all these things are happening to you, you know,
Yeah.
like they're doing everything to you, and you're constantly in this like state of like blame and looking at all of the things pushing your buttons. But when I saw that as like, oh, okay, it's actually my response, it's my anger. And so it was kind of like, okay, if I own it, then it doesn't own me. It's like I can do something with it. And it's interesting how that small shift really transformed that for me, where I was like, okay, there's just this, it's my feeling, like, that I'm generating. And that was really powerful, because I couldn't even see the thoughts and beliefs that were attached to that until I could take ownership of the feeling.
Responding to the heartfelt requests from you, our wonderful, wonderful listeners, for a deeper sense of community, we are so excited to introduce y'all to the But Jesus Drink Wine community.
Get ready to be part of an exclusive experience where you'll join a sisterhood of kindred spirits on a transformative journey of faith, sobriety, and personal growth.
You'll gain access to our private community, a place where deep connections can flourish among women who share your aspirations of strengthening faith in Christ and breaking free from alcohol.
But wait, there's more. We'll host regular connection calls to facilitate fellowship with like-minded gals
No matter where you stand on your alcohol or faith journey, whether you're seasoned or just curious, you are very warmly welcomed here.
Prepare to be inspired by guest expert sessions and engaging Q&As that explore the essential topics for your sobriety, faith, and holistic wellness journey.
Don't miss out on securing your spot. Click the link in the show notes to learn more.
We can't wait to see your beautiful face in the But Jesus Drank Wine community.
So good, babe. It's so, so good. We have so many similarities, and I remember that now from listening to your story, I think on Annie's podcast, but just of being like an expat abroad with no family and having your babies and not having any friends that had babies, and like my very similar story for me too, and just like dove head into the wine. Yeah, the baby's not sleeping, all of it. But I loved listening to your story because we've been talking, I feel like it's become a theme now in the pod of like this idea of like transformation not happening overnight and it takes time. And so when you said the thing about spontaneous sobriety, my first thought was, but it kind of wasn't, because you did the 2 years of like trying to moderate, and then you did so it wasn't. I mean, I don't know. We don't have to label it, but you really have been working at it for a long time. And I think it's so encouraging to point that out for listeners, because so many, and as because you are coaching too, like they want like, how long does it take? How long does it take? How long does it take? And it's like, well, it takes as long as it takes, because like we have to go through it, because God's got this path for us, because we have to learn everything that we need to learn to get to that point. And so, I mean, I know like when you tell your story and break it down by the years, like it was a huge transformation. It took a lot of time, but like look at where you are now. And I just think it's so
Oh
awesome.
my gosh. I'm so glad you point that out because that's so true, right? Like that I always tell my clients like there's years, right, of like journey. Sometimes there is a moment where things just click and you're off on a new path. Sometimes there's even from there still a little bit of back and forth,
Yeah.
right? Like for me, so you're right that it was just a moment where things clicked from years of learning,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's so true. But when you talk about the years of like journeying through that, yeah, it was bloody challenging. It was not easy at all. Like hardest years of my life,
Yeah.
100%. But looking back, like I'm so incredibly grateful for all of it, for
Yeah.
absolutely every single bit of it, because of what I have gained from it now is just been like absolute gold. Like, I mean, I would not have be in my relationship with God and understanding that He loved me through all of that. That it was never about like whether I was doing any of that. He always loved me unconditionally through all of that. And knowing that no matter what I go through or what happens in future, that I have that learning out of all of that and the connections that I've made and the learning of myself and knowing that, I have so much ownership and power over my emotions and how I show up and what I do in this world. Like, I would never have had any of that or the level of like now how I'm able to show up with my kids or teach them about these things or like the gifts of all of that are so manifold. And so it's like, no matter like if you're going through all these hard things, just stick with it because there is so much that comes out of it in
Mhm.
the end.
Yeah. Your story is so relatable, Rena. And I'm struck by how, even though y'all's circumstances are more similar and how that loneliness that you were kind of by yourselves, like there's a picture of that. And I can think about my life where I wasn't alone. I mean, I was always around people. I had a ton of friends and, moms groups and things like that. But I think I'm just like coming to see like how one of the biggest lies of the enemy is that we
Yeah.
are all alone in whatever it is we're doing. So whether we're surrounded by a million people or we don't feel like we have that support and we're alone in that, I mean, it's such a lie, but it's such a lie that, kind of affects everything else. And it reminds me of Kurt Thompson, who would say, like, our all anxiety comes from our belief that we are alone in this. And I just, I'm just really struck by that in your story, that that is something that I think probably a lot of people struggle with, that maybe don't even have words for, they don't realize. Because someone like me, I was like, it never would have crossed my mind that I was so lonely and I felt so alone. I mean, I didn't feel like God was for me because I wasn't perfect like the people in my life that I saw as like real Christians that love God. So the loneliness piece is such a big one, and I just think that that is such a, gosh, like,
It's
yeah,
huge. It's huge. And you're right. Like, it is whether you are with friends or, with other people, when you have kind of this secret life going on that you are so ashamed of, you feel alone. You feel disconnected. Doesn't
yeah,
matter how many people are around you, right? And it's amazing when I started talking about postpartum rage, how many moms were like, oh my gosh, I never wanted to talk about this because, like, that is just so shameful to me. Like, I hated myself for doing it. I hated who I was. I hated who I am, and that's another facet of it. It's just like, it's so amazing when we like recognize that nothing that we go through we're actually alone at. You know,
Yeah. No. Yeah.
that we're all so connected in all of these experiences, even though, the context changes person to person, but we're also connected in all of these things. And yeah, it's so amazing that we have like these platforms to talk about this.
yeah, the power of being able to be honest in our struggle, whether it's like, when you were describing, being a new mom, and it was hard. You had a baby that didn't sleep. I was putting myself, my second was a boy who was also very sensitive child and cried all the time, and I had postpartum depression, I guess afterwards, that I nobody was talking about how hard momming was under the best of circumstances. And I think that's the other part of it, where too, like, the more that we, can be honest about where we're struggling, the less of a foothold the enemy gets on that lie that we are alone. And I love how that is something that we are able to talk about. The more we step into that vulnerability, the more courageous we are. And I love highlighting that in your story. I think that's
Oh,
so
I
beautiful.
absolutely love that. And I think that that's so true. There's such a facade going on about, moms and like doing it all and being it all and having the most amazing house
Mhm.
and having it all together and, still looking perfect as well. And so I just love like more and more, you know, hearing and speaking about like real motherhood, like what it's like, on a day to day basis. And one of the huge things that I've learned is that you have to, like, for me, I realized I had to choose. I had to choose. It didn't work for me having the 5 day a week huge job with a husband that had the same, even more stressful job. And, trying to do all the things at home and trying to have the house and trying to then also be put together all the time. It's like those things just all, there was no space for all of them. Like there was 24 hours in a day, and I had to choose what I wanted to put at the top of the list as like my non negotiable things every day and what was going to shift or move or change. But the amazing thing that happened when I started to choose was like when I stopped drinking, things became so much more clear. The one thing that became clear was like, oh, this job just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It was amazing how I was like holding on to that. And then when I stopped drinking, it was like, oh, that's not working. And so I let it go so easily. I was like, I loved my job, but I was
Raise your
like,
hand if you relate to that. Oh, wait, it's all
well,
of us.
it's so weird. I was drinking to keep the job, and then I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, like, bye bye. That was fine. But then in doing that, in making that choice, like all of this came, like, there was this coaching job that came up that I love and I could do in the way that I wanted to do it and pursue and learn passion, like learn things that I was passionate about and do all these things and have the space. So I have it all in a different way, but it came from first choosing like what was had to go first. And then it's like everything else can fall into place in a way that really works for you and who you want to be. But when I was trying to have it all, it was like I was bursting with the pressure of trying to hold it all.
Yeah. I love that that's kind of it feels like what alcohol like ditching alcohol like then opens up, right? When you realize like what you've been lied about and the cultural lies and that none of that is true, it's like what else isn't true, right? And this whole idea of like having it all and being perfect and having the perfect kids and like the kids need to be perfect and everything needs to be and when we just don't have to buy into that anymore, I mean it's such a gift. Like so
It's huge.
Who knew? Who
yeah.
knew?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? It's like taking off like the alcohol glasses and then it's like,
Yeah.
oh, the whole world looks different. And even the way that I used to see posts on Instagram and things like that, you interpret that as like, oh, look what they're doing, look what they have. And now you kind of look at it and you're like, oh yeah, okay. You see it as the reality of a snippet of somebody's life that it is. And you know that there's this whole like mountain below, the
Mhm.
iceberg that you don't see, but you can put things into perspective again.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I could think about like how it was this feeling of like, oh, I get to opt out of that like mom hustle. Wait, you mean I have an option? I don't have to
Course.
play
Send
that.
Christmas cards to
I'm like,
250.
bro, I'm like, I mean, it was so revolutionary that I had choice in that. And I think that that's, I mean, what you highlight too with being able to choose, it's like getting alcohol out of the way, finding freedom from alcohol, not just like the behavior modification. Okay, I'm not drinking, but the way we talk about it, the way that all the three of us do in this freedom from alcohol space is when it's no longer occupying your, you're taking up physical space in your life, but it's no longer occupying your mind and your heart and your like it has no hold anymore. It's like all of a sudden we remember how to be curious and we remember we do have a choice and we remember all of these things that were just being pushed down and numbed and we were believing all the lies that said that like that just must mean there's something wrong with us that we can't figure this all out and compete with all that and that it's like this like cloud moves
Yeah.
away and oh really who like literally who knew so it's so relatable. I was thinking about your story too and how like y'all maybe you would guess Christy you probably at this point you're like yeah I could see that need but I was angry too. I didn't know that I was angry. I didn't look like an angry person, but once I learned that that was also a mask that I wore, like it was another cheap replacement for tapping into what I really needed, which was like in your case, Rena, like it was rest. You needed sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get you some
Girl was
get you
tired.
some sleep. I needed yeah, I needed some sleep. I needed like there were so many things and it becomes whether it's alcohol or anger or people pleasing or perfectionism or all of the habits and tendencies that we have that like we do on default is just such a cheap replacement for what we really
Yeah.
really need and it's so simple and yet it's so very complicated and not easy to get to but I love that you've brought awareness to the would you call it postpartum? Would you call it
Postpartum rage.
postpartum rage? Yeah, like I'm not a fan of like labels and things like that, but I think that's sometimes like being able to put words to what you've experienced is so healing, so helpful, and I love that you brought attention to that because I can completely relate to that being for me. Like, I mean, who knew that I was like a closet rageaholic here, but I was. I had all that rage, because I didn't want to feel all the things.
It's so true, and like when you talk about that, yeah, needed rest, but also I needed to learn how to ask for help and to say
Yes.
that hey, I'm at my limit. I'm not actually coping with today. I need some help, or I need some space, or I need not to do this right now, or I need to say no. Like it like I'm covering that with just so freeing. And then when you start to like make yourself a little bit vulnerable and say, I'm really tired, I can't, or I'm not coping right now. My gosh, how that shifted everything. And like how my husband just like was there. He did help. He showed up. Like all I needed to do was ask for it. Well, first recognize. I mean, you don't even know, right? You're just so much on autopilot, as you said, me.
Mhm.
Like for so long, you just don't even know. You're just doing, doing, doing. But recognizing that, hey, I have limits as a human.
Yeah.
And when I started to honor them and actually just like look at that with compassion and be like, wow, yeah, like that's pretty unreasonable expecting myself to do all that. And just say that I really need you today. I really need you to come home early from work today. I really, need to just get takeaway tonight. Like those small things. My gosh. Move mountain.
And how connecting,
Yes. And how
you
connecting.
know, that is. Whereas, like, we have that desire to be connected, and yet we're doing these things that keep us disconnected. And what we really need is that connection. So that through that vulnerability of like saying, hey, I need help. One of the biggest stories that kept me stuck, I mean, probably one of the biggest umbrella stories, was that like I did have to do everything myself, and I couldn't depend on anybody else. And I couldn't ask for help because for a million different, I mean, there were many branches that came off of that tree, right? But like that was a really big story that kept me stuck. And it was also from that place of fear, because if you do ask for help, then what does that mean about me? That I am not superwoman. Well, guess what? I'm already not superwoman. It's just I am pretending like I am. So there's so much freedom in meeting that truth, and then, reaching out. Like, I can just think of so many times that I wanted my husband to read my mind, and how he delights in being able to help me, but it does take that vulnerability on my part, and then it creates connection, which just it's just such a beautiful, beautiful illustration, I
Oh,
think.
I love that. Yeah. And the flow on from that is just amazing. It's like, then just like anger creates more anger, but connection creates more connection. And yeah,
Mhm.
it's amazing.
So, if there was like one thing, and I mean, you've given us so much encouragement and so much incredible value, but
Mhm.
just if, if we're talking to the woman who is pacing the streets with the baby in the pram and
Mhm.
doesn't know what to do next, what would you say? And something small like that they could do.
I would say trust, like trust, because I think a lot was happening at that stage as I was really fighting against the not sleeping. I was fighting against I was wanting my old life, but stuck with this new life, and I was trying to resist it all the time. And that was creating a lot of friction.
Yeah.
And I really believe that's what created the depression, is the not just like trusting that this phase of life is okay. Like just look after
Mhm.
yourself, trust that everything that is on your plate today is meant to be there, and surrender to that, right? Like surrender to just like getting the sleep that you need today. Like leave tomorrow to tomorrow, embrace whatever is there for today. And I think that like non-resistance of what was there, as even now, like that's something that helps me so much even now, because like kids get sick. I would usually like, in the past I would have resisted because I wanted to do this work and that work today, and I wanted to do get all of
Yeah.
this done. And now it's just like I let it go, and like today the kids are sick. And so we're just gonna be here. And that has created so much joy, peace, beautiful memories. Like everything, just trusting that, all right, this is where I'm meant to be today. Everything else will take care of tomorrow.
Love
I
that.
have this verse above my
Um,
screen, which is Psalm 37, verse 5. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, he will act. And all I have to do is commit
mm,
my way to the Lord, whatever he puts on my plate today, and trust. He does the rest. Yeah.
so simple and so hard, right? Yeah. I mean,
It's
but
so
it's so
good.
beautiful and it's so true. It just, ugh, I love it.
Rena, tell everybody where they can find you. Where can we find you? Where can we find you?
You can find me at www.alcoholfreedom.com.au. My email is there. Reach out to me if you just want to have a chat or say hi. Like, you don't have to want to work with me, but I really love hearing people's stories and just connecting, with this journey. So yeah,
Yeah, and if anybody is down there in Oz, definitely this is the
chat.
coach. Yeah. Thank you so much,
Oh,
babe. You're
Oh,
amazing.
thank you.
your story has been such a blessing, I know, to our listeners. And I've just personally really enjoyed it because I think about like kind of closing the loop too. Like it reminds me of how not alone we all are, how we are connected through, and the more that we just share, share from that REAL place and not the REEL
Yeah.
place, then the more that we live into like how we were created to be, which is
Oh,
connected
I
to each
love
other. And
that.
so thank
Oh.
you, Rena, for your time and your story
No,
today.
thank you guys so much for having me and for all you do. And yeah, I just love that you guys are doing this in the way that you're doing it. And I'm really excited for where it's all going, just with us as Christians, like being so much more real. And just even in in church, like it was always like this pretending to be, and I love just as Christian woman, just really speaking the truth of yeah, I was born again when I was 27, and this all happened afterwards. you
Yeah.
know, it's not like we get born again and then everything's perfect. And so I love just bringing that to these conversations as well. It's like we're always a work in progress, and God's okay with that. He knew. He knew when he saved me that I was going to be a complete wreck for about 10 years.
Right there with you. I know. I was thinking, Christy, we need a part two because we need to get into
Yeah.
the
We'll have you
the faith
we'll have
part
you back.
too because
Sure.
yeah,
We'll do another one.
yeah.
That's awesome.
I have a whole new angle for that. So thanks,
I love
Rena.
that.
You know I
Oh,
do. You know I
so
do.
good.
I'm like, I want to dig into like the strict Christian household that you grew up in. Like, I mean, not that we have. Anyway, for another day, let's
All
All
so
right.
much.
talk about all the things.
Yes. See you guys next Monday. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. You can find all of our episodes at butjesusdrinkwine.com and be sure to follow us over on Instagram, Love Life Sober, and I'm Not Sober, I'm Free.
To learn more about what we do, you can visit our websites, meethollandshirley.com and lovelifesober.com.
Take a screenshot of this podcast and share it with a friend or two.
And don't forget to subscribe to our pod so you don't have to worry about missing a single episode. And if you love what we're doing, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify.
This helps more women who are feeling stuck and alone in the overdrinking cycle find hope and encouragement.
Thanks, ladies. We so appreciate you, and we'll see you next Monday.